Hey everybody, Scoop Malaire here. Now today, I'm not exactly sure which direction this is going to go in, but I'm going to try to explain something that has kind of rattled around in my mind for a long time. And I sort of never found the exact right audience for this message, and I'm not even sure why I'm saying this, but since it rattles around in my brain, I got to get it out there somewhere. Hey, I'm Scoop Malaire. Anyways, I'm an old-time Deadhead. I grew up not knowing the Grateful Dead until around college, and then a buddy of mine took me to my first show, and it just exposed me to a whole new world. At first, it was just a world I loved hanging around and being around, and then the music started playing, and the music just really hit home with me. Today, I want to explain to you guys some of the similarities that I see for what the Grateful Dead did for rock and roll is kind of similar for what America did for the rest of the world in regards to freedom. And it's kind of loosely connected, and if you guys will stick with me, it might take me a little bit, but I'm going to tell you as much of the backstory as I need to so you can kind of understand exactly why I kind of have these feelings. Particularly because I'm very passionate about both of these things, the Grateful Dead and the United States of America, and I have no problem telling the world both of those things. Anyhow, what I wanted to do today was show you guys this connection that's been rattling around in my mind. So I think first I've got to kind of start off with the concept of just letting you guys know I grew up with classic rock and roll being my passion throughout middle school and high school and still love it to this day. But a really good friend of mine turned me on to the Grateful Dead right around the first year of college. And once that happened, first I fell in love with the atmosphere and the scene, and then the music started playing, and it really hit home for me. So over a short period of time, I got caught up really quickly, and I found out so many things about the Grateful Dead that made them different than other bands. For one thing, some of their music would be these intense rock and roll jams, and other of them would be ballads or even slow, old, folksy tunes that I had never heard before but sounded great. They would take classic staples, songs that people have been playing for years in different ways, and put their own spin on how they were playing it now. But they also had dozens, if not literally hundreds, truthfully, of songs that were their own that were just amazing songs. And it was so cool being able to discover them all. But it wasn't just the music. It wasn't even just the atmosphere and the crowd and the people and the following, but it was also the lore. And the way that the Grateful Dead grew, truthfully, lent itself so well to Deadheads being able to get passionate about this band. Because what they did was they were never a great studio band. In fact, I think they only had one top 40 hit in all of their years. But they were an amazing live band, and they encouraged people early on to do something that nobody else had done in the music industry. They told their followers, bring tape recorders to our concerts and record the concerts. And then each concert was completely unique from each other. The Grateful Dead had probably about 300 songs in their regular repertoire by the time they were done. But along the way, each song, sometimes they would play them in different ways on different nights. And sometimes they would take a certain part of the song, like playing in the band, and jam out in a certain part of the song, and another time they would jam in a different part. And then they would go in and out of one song to another. So they might start off with Scarlet Begonias and then go into Fire on the Mountain, and they go into Touch of Grey, and maybe come back into Fire on the Mountain, because that's what the Grateful Dead did. But the thing that was so neat about that was it made each concert unique. And since they encouraged people to tape their concerts, whereas other performers were shunning people and pushing them away if they snuck recording devices in, the Grateful Dead encouraged them to record the concerts and then told their fans, as long as you don't sell the music, do what you want with it. Trade it with other people. So by the time I got in, I was a little late getting on the bus. Cassettes were the technology of the day. So what we did was we would trade cassettes. So all I would have to do is find somebody else that had concerts that I didn't have, and then arrange with them that I would make copies of the concerts they didn't have. They would make copies of concerts I didn't have. Usually it'd be from distances, so we'd mail each other the tapes. And then you'd have free concerts just for the cost of the blank tapes. And the cool thing was, the other Deadheads were just as passionate about growing their collection and assortment as I was mine. So I would find people that would take and trade 25, maybe 30 different concerts at a time with me. And it was amazing because all of a sudden you get in the mail all this music. And what I started seeing was that people would have different bands on their lists also. It wasn't just Grateful Dead concerts. But the other thing that I noticed was I'd be in the parking lot of a Grateful Dead concert. In fact, the second time I got to see them come around was the first time I started hearing music in the parking lot that wasn't from the Grateful Dead that sounded good to me too. And I'd stop and say, hey, who's that band? They said Phish. Who's that band? Oh, that's Blues Traveler. And all of a sudden, when the concert was over, I would go out and start trading for concerts from those bands because now those bands also allowed their fans to tape their concerts. So the Grateful Dead planted that seed. And when you talk to them, not that I ever talked to them, but to listen to the conversations from Bobby Weir or from Jerry when they've been interviewed in the past, they will tell you there were a couple different reasons they changed things up each night. For one thing, they knew that they had this loyal following, the Deadheads, that would go see them one night after the other, and they wanted to keep giving them fresh shows to look forward to. But also, these guys are such amazing musicians, they said it. They get bored a little bit. So they wanted to do things differently each night. But the great offshoot from this was all these other bands. The guys like Fish and Black Crowes and Blues Traveler and Rusted Root, all these other bands I eventually would get into, they grew up loving the Grateful Dead also and then followed their lead. And even though a lot of them were more successful when it came to commercial albums, some of them anyhow, all of them said to the tapers, bring your recording devices in and record our concerts. Just don't sell the music. So that really, like I said, got the ball rolling, and it just expanded and expanded and expanded. And now you go back to me, you flash back to where I was at. So I heard Fish in one parking lot and then Blues Traveler and the Black Crowes were coming up on the radio. Even Tom Petty would have a lot of the same type of a following. But all of a sudden I had all these different concerts to go to. And these concerts would be like the Grateful Dead shows to some extent. Because if the Dead show would start at 8 o'clock at night, you showed up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because the parking lot would already be full. And it was the greatest hangout scene there was. Well, these other concerts would have parking lot scenes like that as well, and it would just continue to grow, and I'd find new music to listen to and more really cool people, and the community is just such an amazing community. And I know there's the whole stigma with the Deadheads and the hallucinogenic age and the era of love and all this stuff, and yeah, they're hippie concerts, I get that, and I love that. But it just kept growing and growing for me, and as it did, along came the family. And it started, Helen has never been into the same music that I'm into, but she's always respected how much I love this music. So a lot of times I've gone off to different shows alone, but some of our most major concerts, I make sure Helen always comes with me. And it kind of started the first time, one of the first big times with the Fish Millennia show in 1999 at Big Cypress Indian Reservation, which is right there in the heart of the Everglades, when Fish showed up and played about 20 hours of music over 2 days for the Millennia. That's $1231.99 for anyone that wasn't around for it. And when they did, 90,000 people showed up. Now that specific time was a funny time because Helen was pregnant with our first kid, and it was her first trimester, and it was a really rough time for her. But it was so important to get to that music and to be there that she knew she had to be there with me. So we ended up actually renting a moving van and sleeping in the back of the moving van because that would be big enough to bring along this recliner that was the only chair Helen could get comfortable in at that time. It was a recliner that my grandmother had given to us before she passed away. And once again, it all ties that family back together because that was where we were at for one of the biggest shows I've ever had. Not 2 years later, Jared is at his first Grateful Dead show when it was actually the other ones at that point, but they're playing over there in Suwannee, Florida, where we discovered this music park that turned out to be the most amazing place for concerts. And it became somewhere we went year after year after year and surrounded by other Deadheads and other bluegrass fans by then because I started getting into this great jamgrass stuff that was happening. And they would have 2 or 3 different festivals a year. And sometimes it was the Allman Brothers Band, and sometimes it was offshoots from the Grateful Dead, and other times it would be Fish and other amazing bands like the String Cheese Incident, Leftover Salmon, the Yonder Mountain String Band I actually got to discover while I was there at the Suwannee Music Park. But best of all, it became this amazing place that I could bring the kids year after year after year. And I know it's a dumb little thing, but the Grateful Dead turned all that stuff on for me to that whole community, the music, the experience. To this day, it's the music that I enjoy and I love turning people on to. But while all that's going on, I have to point something out. The similarity to what the United States did for the rest of the world. And there's a couple different angles I could take for this. A couple different approaches. But the way I want to start this off is by pointing out that before the United States came along, almost the entire world was controlled by monarchs and dictators and a lot of other people that decided they were going to tell people what to do and where to live and all these horrible things. And even when it wasn't an absolutely horrible thing, it wasn't a great existence. Most people, from what I understand, born, lived, died within about a 30-mile radius of where they lived, and that's all they knew of the world. But when America came along, we came along with this sense, this idea that people are not given freedom by their government or by their rulers, their dictators. No, they're put here to be free by their maker, by their creator. And it's government's job to get the hell out of the way. And I know we didn't get it right when things first started, but that concept of freedom is always correct. And it took an awful lot for our country to really get stuff ironed out. And I get that. I honestly do. But the concept of freedom works, and it worked for America. And this freedom that Americans had became something that no other country had had for an extended period of time like this. And what we did was we came up with technologies and advancements and so many things that made our country and the lives of the people who live in our country a better place. And they also made the world a better place. Not just because so many great people came to our country from around the world and made us better, but because so many people saw what was happening here, couldn't come here, but wouldn't settle for the crap that they had at home and fought for a similar freedom like we have here in America. And if for no other reason, that alone should make America the greatest thing that ever happened to this world. But the cool thing was that just like the Grateful Dead started the music and showed people a way of change up the music every night and keep it interesting, allow people to record it and spread that music out, Americans did such amazing things with our freedom that other people saw this as that beacon that you've heard people talk about, and they either came here or made their place more like here. And now when you look around the rest of the world, you have so few kings and queens. You have horrible dictators in certain parts of the world, but it isn't everywhere anymore. And the world is such a better place because we set the example for freedom. Just like, in my opinion, there's so much incredibly recorded music over all these decades, even from some of the more mainstream bands. Some of those guys had to recognize that here was this Grateful Dead, this band that allowed people to record their concerts, that never had top hits on the radio, but could show up at a football stadium at the drop of a hat and fill 90,000 people almost anywhere in the country. And they did it for 3 decades. So, again, it's a little difficult to try to tie this stuff together. This is a pretty long video. I'm hoping by the time that I've edited this and uploaded this so that I have figured out a way to show the pictures and videos that I could put along the way. If I did, I want to point out about these pictures and videos. Anything you're seeing is a picture that I took or a video that I took. And it's a shame that these smartphones that we have with us everywhere now weren't around at the beginning of my real following of the Grateful Dead and the music and stuff, because I think it would have been so cool to have some of the stuff from the original. But at the very least, it's kind of neat that I got to share a lot of our original family pictures and photos, because those happened at a lot of these very same music festivals that I became so passionate about going to once I really got turned on to the Grateful Dead. I'm not really sure if I accomplished what I set out to do here or not today. I'm not sure if people are going to like stuff like this, especially if they aren't into the Grateful Dead or America, I guess. But anyhow, as long as you guys are going to keep watching, I'm going to keep talking. I'm Scoop Malaire. Please subscribe, like, and share for even more Scoop Malaire.